Nobody was supposed to open it. That was the whole point. A storage unit in Burbank, California. Rented under a fake name. Paid in cash. Every single month. For years. And when the payments finally stopped, nobody came forward to claim it. No family member. No lawyer. No assistant. Just silence. When the storage company eventually ran the name through their system, nothing came back. The identity didn't exist. So they called the police. And when officers finally cut through that lock and pulled open the door, they froze. Because what was inside that unit wasn't junk. It wasn't forgotten furniture or old clothes. It was a life. A secret, carefully hidden life. Belonging to one of the most famous men who ever lived. And what they found in there changed everything people thought they knew about Sammy Davis Jr. But here's the thing. To understand why that vault existed, why it had to exist, you need to go back. All the way back. To a Harlem apartment in 1925. To a baby born into a world that had already decided who he was allowed to be. And what he was never, ever supposed to become. Sammy Davis Jr. arrived on December 8, 1925. His parents were vaudeville performers. Song, dance, the road. That was the family business before Sammy could walk. But even at birth, there was already a secret. His mother, Ella Sanchez, was Cuban. The family never talked about it. Not publicly. Not even privately if they could help it. Because in 1920s America, Cuban heritage could destroy a career before it started. Anti-immigrant sentiment ran deep. Record sales depended on public approval. And public approval had conditions. So they hid it. And that became the first lesson Sammy Davis Jr. ever learned about the world. That survival sometimes meant silence. That who you really were wasn't always something you got to show people. By the time Sammy was 2 years old, he was already on stage. Not watching. Performing. While other toddlers were learning to speak in full sentences, Sammy was learning to read a crowd. His father and family friend Will Maston formed a trio and took Sammy city to city, theater to theater, stage to stage. The spotlight became the only home he really knew. But every city also taught him something else. The signs that said whites only. The back entrances. The hotels that wouldn't let him through the front door. The restaurants that served everyone but him. He was a child, and America was already teaching him his place. Then, when Sammy was just 3 years old, his parents split. His father took custody. Will Maston stepped in as a godfather figure. And the road became everything. No school. No classroom. No childhood in any traditional sense. Just stages, cities, and the slow education of a boy learning that talent was the only armor he had. By 7, he was on film. A movie called Rufus Jones for President. A young black boy imagining himself in the White House. In 1932, the audience laughed. They were charmed. And for a few minutes, watching little Sammy Davis Jr. on that screen, they forgot about everything society told them they were supposed to think. That was his gift. Even then. But 1943 changed everything. Sammy was 18 years old, 5'6", 120 pounds, and the United States Army drafted him. He left the stage and entered a world that had no use for charm. The racism he had experienced in show business was real. But this was different. This was organized, institutional, and in some moments it was savage. The first soldier he met called him a slur. That was his welcome. What followed over the next 2 years was something Sammy rarely spoke about in detail. But the people who knew him said it never fully left him. White soldiers kidnapped him and painted him white from head to toe. They forced him to drink beer laced with urine. They broke his nose 3 times. They tied him to a tree in freezing temperatures and left him there through the night. And one night, a group of them beat him so badly he spent 3 days in a hospital bed. No one was disciplined. No one was held accountable. The army looked away. Sammy lay in that hospital bed and thought about not going on. The weight of it, the endless, deliberate cruelty, pushed him toward the edge. He later admitted he thought about ending it all. The darkness was that complete. But something pulled him back. When he was assigned to the Army's entertainment unit, he found it again. His voice, his feet, his instinct for a crowd. Even the men who hated him couldn't walk out. Their applause felt like power. And power was something Sammy Davis Jr. decided he would never surrender again. He came back from the army in 1951 ready to burn the world down. And he did. March 1951. Ciro's nightclub on Sunset Boulevard. Sammy opened for Janice Page as part of the Wilmaston Trio. The night was electric. But what happened after the Academy Awards changed everything. The room filled. Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland. They watched Sammy perform. And when he finished, they didn't just applaud. They rose. The bookings that followed were immediate. The buzz was unstoppable. Within a year, he had a television pilot from ABC worth $20,000. Unheard of for a black entertainer in 1952. The sponsors didn't back it, but it didn't matter. Sammy Davis Jr. had already arrived. And then, on a highway in November 1954, it almost ended. He was driving his Cadillac from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. U.S. Route 66. A car backed into his lane without warning. The crash sent the horn button directly into his left eye. The damage was permanent. Doctors at Community Hospital couldn't save it. Friends rushed to his side. Frank Sinatra paid the hospital bills and brought him to Palm Springs to recover. Frank gave him no room for self-pity. Get back on stage, he told him, or lose everything. 8 weeks later, Sammy Davis Jr. walked back out under the lights at Ciro's. Glass eye, tap shoes, full voice. The audience went wild. He started joking about it himself. Called himself a one-eyed Negro who's Jewish. Because during his recovery, reading about struggle and survival and centuries of persecution, he had found something that felt like home. He converted to Judaism. Many mocked him for it. He didn't care. He said being black and Jewish didn't divide him. It made him more. Now, here's where the story gets darker. And this is one of the things that was sitting in that storage unit in Burbank. Documentation, letters, photographs, evidence of what really happened between Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak in 1958. They met on The Steve Allen Show. She was one of Hollywood's most luminous stars. He was the most electric performer alive. What started as friendship became something neither of them could control. They spent holidays together. They met each other's families. In a different world, it might have been simple. But this was 1958. Only 4% of Americans approved of interracial relationships. Emmett Till had been murdered just 3 years earlier. Sammy hid under blankets in cars when they traveled together. They met secretly at a beach house in Malibu, away from cameras, away from a world that would have destroyed them both. Then a gossip column got hold of it. A false report claiming they were engaged spread across the country, like a fire nobody could stop. Studios panicked. Columbia Pictures panicked. And then the men behind Columbia Pictures made a phone call. Sammy was taken. Not asked. Taken. Men connected to organized crime sat him down and delivered a message with complete clarity. End it with Kim Novak, or lose your remaining eye, or lose something worse than that. Even Sam Giancana, the mob boss who had genuine affection for Sammy, told him plainly, I cannot protect you in Hollywood. Not for this. On January 7th, 1958, Sammy ended things with Kim Novak. He didn't want to. He had no choice. 3 days later, on January 10th, he married a black singer named Lorraine White, a transaction disguised as a wedding. He paid her up to $25,000. That night, overwhelmed by grief and rage and shame, he tried to strangle her. His assistant found him later, alone in a room, holding a gun. The marriage lasted 3 months, and Sammy Davis Jr. carried that story quietly for the rest of his life. 2 years later, in 1960, he fell in love again, this time with a Swedish actress named May Britt, and this time he refused to hide it. The wedding was planned for Temple Israel of Hollywood. Bomb threats arrived before the invitations did. They moved the ceremony to his home. Frank Sinatra stood beside him. Peter Lawford stood beside him. And Sammy Davis Jr. married the woman he loved in front of a world that told him he had no right to. The price was immediate and steep. Swastikas appeared on their property. May Britt lost her contract with 20th Century Fox. Sammy was disinvited from President Kennedy's inauguration, a man whose campaign he had publicly supported, because the optics of a black man married to a white woman were considered too dangerous for a presidency. They had a daughter, Tracy. They adopted 2 sons. and they tried to build something real inside a world that was determined to tear it apart. After 8 years, it collapsed anyway. May filed for divorce in 1968. Extreme cruelty, mental suffering, an affair with singer Lola Falana. But the truth was deeper than any single betrayal. The endless touring, the weight of public hatred, the private demon Sammy had been feeding for years with cocaine, alcohol, and a restless need to escape himself. His Beverly Hills home became famous for the wrong reasons. Wild parties, drugs, rumors that circled the industry for decades. On stage, he was immaculate. Off stage, he was disappearing. By the time he reunited with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin for their 1988 farewell tour, something was already wrong with Sammy's body. He didn't know it yet. The tour was triumphant. Arenas holding 25,000 people, crowds that hadn't seen the Rat Pack together in decades. But Dean Martin left after 5 shows. His own health was failing. Liza Minnelli stepped in. The show went on. And then in August 1989, Sammy Davis Jr. lost his sense of taste. His throat felt wrong. Persistently, undeniably wrong. The diagnosis arrived without mercy. Throat cancer. Decades of smoking, up to 4 packs a day, had finally collected their debt. Doctors gave him a choice. Remove the voice box and live. Or try radiation and keep the voice he had spent 60 years building. He chose his voice. 8 brutal weeks of treatment. The tumor shrank. He returned to the stage one last time. And then early 1990, the cancer came back. Faster. Stronger. Surgery was no longer possible. By the end, Sammy Davis Jr. weighed 60 pounds. On May 16, 1990, at 64 years old, he died at his Beverly Hills home, and the silence that followed was almost immediately broken by the sound of the IRS. Despite earning an estimated $50 million across 6 decades, nights where he made $185,000 for a single performance, Sammy Davis Jr. died owing the government more than $7 million. His wife Untold inherited the debt because she had co-signed their tax returns. She sold the 11,000-square-foot mansion. Most of it went to the mortgage. The bills kept coming. $2,000 for tuxedos, $3,500 for groceries, $118,000 on a shopping center mortgage, his gold records, his royalties, all of it swallowed by what he owed. In September 1991, over 1,800 people gathered in Los Angeles to watch the pieces of Sammy Davis Jr.'s life sold at auction. His gold record for Candyman, $11,000 for a pair of his tap shoes, scrapbooks, walking sticks, jewelry, his hats. Untold wept as every piece left her hands. But here's what nobody at that auction knew. Some of those items never made it to the floor. 185 pieces of jewelry went missing. An Andy Warhol painting disappeared. And somewhere in Burbank, California, a storage unit was being quietly filled, rented under a stolen name, paid for in cash, and loaded with Sammy Davis Jr.'s most personal possessions, a trumpet, an antique record player, a jukebox still loaded with Candyman, clothing, photographs, documents, letters. When investigators traced it back, they found that an employee close to Untold had arranged the whole thing. The reasoning was almost heartbreaking. The IRS was taking everything. Someone had decided to save what they could. They used a stolen identity. They paid cash every month. And if a billing error hadn't sent an invoice to the wrong man, a 28-year-old named Matthias Horenik, who had never heard of the storage unit, it might have worked. But the IRS found it, seized it all. And that was the final chapter of Sammy Davis Jr.'s story. A man who spent his entire life being told what he couldn't have, what he couldn't do, who he wasn't allowed to love, where he wasn't allowed to sleep, what parts of himself he had to keep hidden. Even in death, the world found a way to take from him. He broke every barrier they put in front of him. He sang through racism and violence and loss and grief. He danced on stages that didn't want him there. He loved people he was forbidden to love. He stood in Selma. He stood on Broadway. He stood in Las Vegas when Las Vegas told him to use the back door. He used his talent as armor, as weapon, as testament. And decades after that vault was sealed, after the lock was cut and the door swung open and investigators stood there in silence, staring at what was left of his life, what strikes you isn't the mystery of who hid it. It's what the hiding tells you. Even after his death, the people who loved Sammy Davis Jr. were still fighting to hold on to something, just like he had been doing his entire life.